To masters or not to masters?
That is the question.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Aika. I'm a trainee clinical psychologist at Oxford. So today I am talking about to masters or not to masters. This question is one of the most commonly asked questions since starting the page. I've been asked it at least 50 to 100 times. So the question is, do I need a master's degree for clinical psychology, or would I benefit from a master's degree in order to get onto a clinical psychology doctorate? For those who are unfamiliar with the whole process, as some of you are high school students or people who are just initially considering clinical psychology, in the UK, master's degree is, bottom line, is not required to become a psychologist. What is required is a doctorate degree. And this is specific to clinical psychology. Other types of psychology might have different rules. So I understand health psychology has a different rule. Counseling psychology also requires a doctorate, etc., etc. I can explore different kind of routes in a different video. But for this video, I'm focusing on clinical psychology, which is the route that I'm most familiar with. Okay, something also to clarify. Today I'm talking about master's degrees for people who have had BPS accredited psychology degrees in the UK or outside and they found equivalency. I'm not talking about LSE conversion courses, which those ones to masters or not to masters if you want to get into like psychology, for people who haven't had an undergraduate degree in psychology, yes, like that's a definite yes. But I'm talking about the specific master's degrees that aren't conversion courses, so people who are already psychology students thinking about whether they want to do further study in psychology. The bottom line is, if you have a 2-1 degree or a first class degree in your undergraduate, you do not need a master's degree to start applying to the doctorate. So basically you won't get screened out from the first round. However, if you have a 2-2 or below, you will usually require to show that you have academic capability by doing a master's degree and getting a good grade on that. So that's the bottom line of what the base requirement is for clinical psychology doctorate. So the current climate is really important to talk about at this point. Whilst it is not actively encouraged to have a master's degree or anything in order to get onto the doctorate, and it's not necessary, and if you ask anyone they will say no, you don't need a master's degree. The reality that no one really talks about or isn't talked about enough is that most people do have master's degrees. If you have a look at the alternative handbook, which is a handbook that summarizes all the kind of different types of degrees and years of experience and things like that of people who have got onto the doctorate of clinical psychology across the universities, I am confident to say that a lot of them will have had master's degrees, or nowadays the trend seems to be more and more people with PhDs as well. So you can definitely see, I know this is probably anecdotal and like this you probably need to do proper research on this, but like anecdotally it feels like there is a sense that there's an inflation of degrees. So a bachelor's degree isn't enough anymore, and actually most people end up doing a master's degree in some form of clinical psychology, psychosis, clinical neuroscience, you know, things like that, just to give themselves that extra edge for jobs. That's when people get confused, and that's why I think that's the most common question that I get asked, is because whilst people usually say, oh, you don't need a master's degree, it's just a waste of money, it's just a waste of time, the reality is they keep seeing people who got onto the doctorate with master's degrees, or they see a lot of people who, or they kind of feel like they're not getting that competitive edge to get the jobs that are required in order to get onto the doctorate because they've been sieved out by people with master's degrees. That's the difficult point. And then there's also another kind of ethical issue, like a kind of like a class of financial issue, is that this system is by no means fair, because obviously master's degrees give you that competitive edge. Only a certain group of people can afford master's degrees, and actually that means that a lot of people can't see this as an option and basically gets left out of this career. Now, the ethical issues of this is really, I don't know, touchy, and I can't solve this in one video, but it's something to consider, I guess, and it's really frustrating, but that is the reality now. reality is, if you have an extra degree, you're probably going to stand out that tiny bit more than someone else that doesn't have that degree, but it's not necessary. I will put some timestamps below. I'll first cover the pros and cons of master's degrees, and then the next part of it I'll be looking at considerations that you should ask yourself when thinking about whether you want to do a master's degree or not. I really want you guys to make the decisions for yourself, ultimately asking me or anyone in the field. All we're going to ask you is what's important for you, and it really depends on your own situation. There's no clear-cut answer to any of this. So let's start off with some pros and cons of master's degrees. So one of the pros is that a lot of people have had academic background in psychology, but they don't have a background in clinical psychology or any kind of specialist psychology that they're interested in, for example, child and developmental psychology or clinical neuroscience or research methods or forensic psychology or health psychology. So masters is a really good opportunity to really delve into that specific type of psychology that you are interested in. And this comes back to the structure of the bachelor's degree. It's very much theory based on kind of history of psychology. It doesn't necessarily cover things that we are actually interested in as aspiring clinical psychologists. So for example, in Cambridge, when I did my psychology degree in psychological and behavioral sciences, a lot of times I was studying monkeys, I was studying neuroscience, I was studying like pain receptors in hands, I was studying cognitive neuroscience, so memory formation, I was studying the family, I was studying developmental psychopathology, but none was really specific to clinical psychology. So to get a better insight into the world of clinical psychology, master's degrees is a really good way, especially ones that are very clinically focused. They'll probably give you some, introduction to CBT or introduction to psychodynamic therapy or introduction to blah, blah, blah. So like give you a little taster of everything that's clinically focused. Another pro is that at least for, I guess, the London universities, I don't know about the other ones, but you are able to access top lecturers and top academics of that field in working in London, or working in whichever city that you're doing your master's in, because they will be the ones speaking and they will be providing you with the current research, the cutting edge research on certain things, and also the most, I guess, up-to-date or sophisticated clinical advice on certain populations, and also research directions as well. So it's a really good space to have that network, to talk to people that you might be interested in, doing their kind of job and things like that. And also, yeah, it's a really good way. Another pro of master's degrees is that if you are unsure about clinical psychology, so when I did my master's degree, I did it not just because I was interested in becoming a clinical psychologist, it was because I was actually interested in becoming a PhD student. So I was also considering being a researcher. Degrees like this allow you that space to really think about what your research question is, what kind of research is out there in the topics that you're interested in, and also because you have a master's thesis, a lot of times some people would continue working with their supervisor during their master's, continue the work as a PhD student, or they're more familiar with, let's say you go to UCL for your master's, they would be more familiar with the system and be able to see like what kind of research is the institution generating, and see where they would want to stand in that. So it gives you again a little taster of the research side and also the clinical side as well. Another pro that I found was a huge pulling factor for me for a master's degree was that my experience of research in my undergraduate was very densely related to theory and also related to statistics, but unfortunately I didn't have the best experience doing my undergrad dissertation. I did well, but at the same time I didn't feel like I really enjoyed research, so I wanted to give it another go basically. So for some people who want another go and I guess have a goal to publish, a master's degree is a really good opportunity to find and seek out those opportunities to engage in research in a deeper manner, and then that will help you in research assistant post interviews, or it can help you in PhD interviews or even doctorate interviews, and help you, publish a paper if you can. So cons of master's degrees. So number one is money. It's really expensive. Undeniably, it's another year of school fees and of rent fees, of living costs, just for ultimately what is a few lectures a week and then a thesis and things like that. So it might feel like sometimes I feel like I'm paying a lot for what I'm getting. A lot of the times, especially the new master's degrees, they might not be very well organized, with lots of like room changes or structural changes, things like that, that can be very unhelpful and can generate like not necessarily the best experience. Another con of master's degrees is that it's not really a con by misconception. It's that like this idea that after the master's degree you'll be much more on you'll be much more competitive in the market of psychology. But I think increasingly I am finding there's a lot of people with master's degree that still have to work from the bottom. So bottom as in being a support worker. So it doesn't elevate them to become an assistant psychologist because they've got a master's, because there's so many people with a master's degree fighting for those posts as well as support worker posts. So I think like the degree inflation has like gone to that level now. So I think a lot of people have misconceptions that if they have a master's degree, job search should be no issue. It's still as much of an issue as if you came out of a bachelor's degree. So if you are thinking of getting clinical experience and that's what you need and you're academically okay, I probably recommend you getting some clinical experience directly as a support worker and try to work your way up to become an assistant psychologist than to go down the expensive master's route, especially if you're not really into the kind of research side of things. Another big con is that there's a lot of, I don't know even if it's called an ethical issue, but this one's for the international students. I find that it is a money-making machine, and they are very, maybe this is controversial to say, but this is definitely what my experience was, is that like a lot of the internationals I saw in the master's degree did not know what the career prospects were afterwards. I think they were given a false promise that was a white lie. It wasn't a direct lie of like you can definitely stay in and work in the country, but they also didn't say, oh, by the way, check your visa status. So I think that's a huge, not ethical issue, but like an advertisement, I don't know, kind of sneaky advertisement of like, usually at the end of the master's thing, they would talk about like graduate prospects, and they were like, oh, people who graduate from this course graduate and become PhDs, become assistant psychologists or PhD researchers, when in reality, those posts are reserved for people who are UK citizens who have right to work in the UK. So a lot of internationals would read that and be like, oh wow, cool, so after this I can work in the UK. No, like a lot of times it's not like that. Like you just, a lot of the people from my cohort of masters had to just go back to their home country because they realised the system of the NHS is not built to provide visas for people who want to stay and aren't UK citizens. It's not like working in a bank or a law firm or something, but it's never really made that explicit in the kind of course information page when you're first applying, and I find that that's extremely questionable. And I really want hopefully that this video gets shown to get like international people can see this, is because a lot of times even the PhD posts are reserved for home status students, so people who are UK or EU. I don't know about the EU bit now, but yeah, they're reserved for UK citizens, but they don't make that clear. So a lot of the questions that I get asked is that, oh, I'm from, let's say, India, I want to do this master's, what my job prospects after this? For me, like the first thing I'm like, check your visa status, check whether you have right to work, because that's the number one thing. And yeah, it's extremely frustrating actually to see like a lot of people wanting to become psychologists in the UK but just can't find the route to become a psychologist here, and then they get sold this, I guess, false promise or a white lie by master's degrees that want to take in international students because they have to pay £29,000 compared to local students who have who only pay £9,000. It's really good money, so there's strong incentive why they don't make it clear, and I think that's hugely problematic. There are some, I guess, internationally based PhDs or work opportunities, and in very, very, very rare cases, you can work in the NHS even if you're not, if you don't have like necessarily the visa. Sometimes they do that for you, but you might have to pay it. Anyways, that whole thing is really confusing. After 6 months, I'm still trying to figure it out and try to tell you guys the right information, but to be honest with you, I still haven't figured out how some people manage to stay. But once I find it, I'll definitely interview them on my channel. Before you ask anyone whether you should do a master's or not, these are some of the things that I would like you to consider. So some questions I thought about for you to consider, and hopefully by the end of it you'd have a clearer idea of whether master's is right for you. The first consideration is, why do you want to do it? So before I would usually answer, oh no, you don't need one. Now I usually ask, why do you want to do it? So your why is really important, because if you watch my previous video on the truth about psychology degrees, I talk about how if you don't have a why, and if you don't have a very targeted goal by the beginning, and you just see how it goes, you'll come in as confused as you are going out of the master's degree. Just as if you went into a bachelor's degree, you'll come out equally confused as when you came in and when you graduated. So have really specifically why you're doing it. What do you need? So in terms of specifically in clinical psychology, mostly the needs are quite similar. And you need to balance, you need to consider where you're at in terms of each of these things that I'm about to say, and then judge around whether a master's degree would be beneficial for you. So, master's degree can provide clinical experience through placements and in an honorary setting, or it can also provide chances for further research opportunities, or it can provide you with some kind of general knowledge and current research on clinical disorders, clinical treatment, things like that. So if, let's say, you have, if you don't have enough research experience and you want to kind of like improve that, yes, of course you can try to just be a research assistant, or you can do a master's degree and try to have that master's thesis as like further evidence that you can do research and be more familiar with different kinds of statistical methods. So for example, in my bachelor's degree I did SPSS statistical method, and then in master's I did Stata, so I could basically on my CV be like, I could do SPSS and Stata. If you want clinical experience, as I said before, doing a master's isn't the best way to get it. It's a really good foot in the door to, like, if you are considering clinical work but not sure about it and don't really want to do something full-time, then master's is probably pretty good because you can do it 1 day a week. But there's no say that you can definitely do that in your own time as well, like work a 4-day job and do clinical work voluntarily 1 day a week. So a master's is not necessary for that criteria. If your why in terms of why you want to do a master's is because other people want to do masters, I really, really want you to stress that that's not the right why. Oh, no, that's not a good place to stop, basically. I think you really have to refine exactly what you want to get out of that master's degree. So if it's because other people have it and other people you see on the doctorate have it, that's why you have it. That's not enough, because correlation is not causation. So those people who have master's degrees who got into the doctorate might have gained something out of that master's. So for example, they published a paper, or they've taken a year, like they've used that year really well and like made the most out of their placement, and then that led to further job opportunities, and then that kind of proactivity led them to get onto the doctorate. Another correlation, not causation point, is that might just be an indicator of class and financial background. So people who, as we know in clinical psychology, it's very dominated by middle class people, including myself. I'm middle class as well, but like people who can afford risking 2 years of their lives to do kind of like minimum wage jobs and do a master's and get onto the doctorate. So it might be indicators of that rather than the masters having a merit themselves. Does that kind of make sense? So if your why is that, oh, because they have one, and you carve out like, I don't know, thousands of pounds to get one, but you're not really sure why you're doing it, and you take it quite passively, because of that, you'll probably come out equally confused and end up having to work as a support worker anyways, and then have to work your way up towards an AP, and you could have saved that 9,000 quid. Or in terms of timing, you could have waited, so after graduating from your bachelor's, waited, worked for a bit, and then thought better about specifically why you want to do this specific master's, like what do you want to gain out of it basically. Secondly, related to the thing that I just said, is around timing. So why now? So why do you want to do your master's now? So I should have asked this question to myself when I graduated my bachelor's and went straight into master's, because I definitely thought that was the wrong timing, because my brain was saturated with knowledge. I was really good at hacking exams. Information was flowing in from one ear and out the other ear. I wasn't really engaging clinically, and looking back, it would have been much better if I just jumped straight in and, you know, faced the fear of the real life adult work, did something clinically, and then went back to do the master's. And the master's is not going to run anywhere. As we all know, it's a money-making machine. It's not going anywhere. In fact, it'll only increase over the years, so it's not going to go anywhere. So there's no loss in delaying the year, right? So think about that. Like, why are you doing it now? Is it because out of fear of working clinically, or is it because you're not sure what to do? A master's might not answer that question for you. Also ask yourself, in terms of timeline, when would you want to apply to the doctorate ideally? So would it affect your kind of work? Would it affect your kind of goals? So a lot of people who struggle financially and can't afford a full-time master's degree, I recommend 2-year part-time, which is a very common option now for people who want to work alongside doing their master's degree. Obviously, this means that it will delay your chances of getting onto the doctorate, as you can't do 2 degrees concurrently, obviously, but it is an option. So in terms of timing, another thing to consider is, like, do you want to do it over 2 years instead of 1 year, basically? So the third thing to consider is, what are the prospects? So there's different ways to think about this, right? So prospects of the specific master's degrees that you are in. So really do your research here. So what I did is basically just cold message people who have done the master's that I am interested in, and ask them really, like, what is the proportion of people who actually get the jobs that they want, and how long did it take? Especially for internationals, as I just talked about, the prospects might be very slim. So really ask the admissions first, like, is there scope to do the work that I want, like be a PAP or an AP once I graduate as an international student? And for locals, in terms of job prospects, it's that thing about the con that I talked about earlier in the video. It's that you might still have to start to become a clinical support worker anyways, so there's no loss in delaying the master's degree until you just, like, earn some money, save some money up, get some clinical experience, and then the master's degree will mean a lot more to you, because things would make more sense and hold more value. Also think about, like, how well they're linked in terms of research, because it might be that in the middle of the master's degree you realize, actually, research is the place for me, not clinical work, and you want to become a PhD student. So look at, you know, how many opportunities for PhD students there are, or research opportunities, also the prospects within the master's degree. So do they have an integrated placement? And how many hours? So some master's degrees only has like 30 hours maximum or something like that. Other ones it's like once every week for like a full day. Obviously this is all unpaid, so have a look at that. So if you want to go into clinical psychology, I really recommend ones with integrated placement hours, because that's a really good foot in the door to work in the NHS in the future and really understand the issues that the NHS are facing, and also just see how the NHS works in general. So to end this video, to masters or not to masters, bottom line is depends on your situation. So if you have a 2-2, probably yes. If you had 2-1 or above, it depends. Bottom line of that is no, so you can apply to the doctorate without a master's. However, it does afford you that competitive edge to get the jobs required to get onto the doctorate. However, it's not necessary. And with the current climate of degree inflation, there's a lot of ethical issues around this, how it segregates people with good financial background, those who can afford masters and can then have that competitive edge to become an assistant psychologist or PhD or whatever, or PhD student. Yes, it is an unfair game. Really ask yourself the questions that I've addressed today: why you want to do it, why now, and what are the prospects, and can you achieve those prospects in alternative ways that doesn't require you to pay like lots of money. That's basically it. Thank you for tuning in, and if you want any kind of points clarified about the master's degree, or want to tell me what you think about the current climate of master's degree, please let me know down below. YouTube comments, I read all of them. And as usual, subscribe if you haven't, and follow me on Instagram, the Oxford Psych. Okay, bye.